Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of the Blood Brothers podcast. We finished up a couple of weeks ago with our Reverend Richard Cole's interview, but we're back for a little special about capital crime, which is a festival that's happening in London from Thursday the 31st of August until Saturday the 2nd of September. It's in the Leonardo Hotel, which is near St. Paul's Cathedral. And it promises to be an amazing weekend. Some of the names that are going to be there: Richard Osman, Richard Armitage, Dredasay Mitchell, Mark Billingham, Joanne Harris, Ben Aronovich, Sally Wainwright, who wrote Happy Valley. Kate Atkinson is going to be in conversation with David Headley, as is Robert Goddard. There's Lisa Jewell, Adele Parks. The Northern Crime Syndicate guys are going to be doing a make a bestseller against the clock, which is always really fun. There's quizzes going on. There's a disco on the end night. I don't know if people say disco anymore. Who else is there? Steve Kavanagh. There is Peter James is going to be there. Fiona Cummins, Mark Edwards. Too many to mention. Shari LaPena. I mean, what more could you want? The names are massive. There are a variety of tickets. You can buy a whole weekend ticket. You can buy day tickets, or you can buy just panel tickets if there's something that takes your fancy there. So whatever your budget is, there's there's something for you. Also, if you keep an eye on the Twitter page, there's some little discounts going on there, so it might be worth keeping an eye there if if you want a little bit of money off. There's also some really special stuff going on, like there's some book launches. So David Fennell is going to be launching The Silent Man. Victoria Selman is going to be releasing All the Little Liars, and Gareth Rubin is going to be releasing his book, which is like two books in one, and looks absolutely amazing, and it's called The Turnglass. So those are happening as well. There's also the Fingerprint Awards, and two of our guests tonight, Mike Craven is up for Crime Book of the Year, and Vaseem Khan is up for the Historical Book of the Year. And there's all sorts of other categories going on. There's just so much, and David and Lizzie, who's putting it together, they've put their heart and soul into it, and the lineup is insane. So if you're around London or you're in the UK and you can get to, or further afield, take a plane, do try and go, because it promises to be such a lovely weekend, and it'd be great if we could really drive up the ticket sales as well, which I think they're doing okay by themselves, really, but if we can help in any way, that would be cool. So yes, please do try and get there. The episode tonight features four of the people who are going to be there. So we've got Vaseem Khan, we've got Liz Nugent, we've got Laura Shepherd-Robinson, and we've got Mike Craven, MW Craven. I'm going to be there too, although I'm not on their level, but I'm very excited to be involved. I've got a sort of an announcement coming just before Capital Crime, and then there's something a bit special happening at Capital Crime. So if you can get there, you'll know what it is, and I can't say anything more about it now. So I will hand over to our guests, who will tell you about what they're doing, about their latest book. It's a really lovely chat, and I hope you enjoy it. And we'll put the links to the Capital Crime tickets and things like that, and you can explore the website, look at the schedule, and then book your tickets, and we will see you there. So yeah, I will hand over to past me, who's going to chat to those four guys. I am joined tonight by four huge names that will be appearing there. Four huge names out of loads of names. I didn't count, but there must be at least 100. But tonight I'm joined by Laura Shepherd-Robinson, Mike Craven, Vaseem Khan, and Liz Nugent. Hello, all.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us on.
It's lovely to meet some of you that I haven't met before, so really nice time. So Capital Crime is happening at the end of August. Starts on Thursday the 31st and runs until Saturday the 2nd. It's at the Leonardo Hotel in London. Was anyone there last year?
Yeah,
Me.
It was
Yeah.
was it in a rainy cold park last year?
it was, but we made our own warmth. It was fun.
We did.
We huddled.
I had great fun telling people there's no such thing as bad weather, just poor choices of clothing, which after I said it for the 10th time was really, really winding people up. So I thought doubled down. It was good. I enjoyed it, but I appreciate it wasn't an ideal venue for everyone. So
I stayed to the bitter end. I stayed every day and right to the bitter end, and there was an amazing improv group that were there towards the end.
Yeah, they were great.
Well, I was just bitter at home because I wasn't invited.
Oh, you're just bitter, full stop, Liz. Bitter and twisted, like all good crime writers.
Absolutely.
Please, could you just tell us a little bit, first of all, about your latest book? And Laura, shall we start with you?
Sure. My latest book is called The Square of Sevens. It's set in the 18th century, and it follows the story of a young female fortune teller who she grows up never having known her mother, and this is a great mystery in her life. And she goes in search of, I guess, the secrets of her own past, using her fortune telling skills to infiltrate various households where she believes she can find out about her parents and her past. And yes, there are murders in it too.
There has to be. And it's a beautiful looking thing, isn't it? The cover's fantastic.
They did me very proud on the book. It looks stunning.
Wave it around. Oh, is this audio only?
It is audio only, yeah, but feel free to wave anything around that you want.
Careful, Vaz.
Yeah. Not again. Not after last time.
We'll put a little picture of it up as a graphic at some point. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yours?
I have to practice saying it's my new book because I actually wrote it I finished it in 2014, and it just sort of sat in an electronic drawer until COVID happened, and it sort of saw the light of day. So it's called Fearless. It's not a poentilly. It's the first in potentially a new series. There's certainly another book in it, and it's about a guy who can't feel fear. He's medically incapable of feeling fear, and he gets into all sorts of japes in the States, and it's very, 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 very violent. Not as violent as it was before the American editor got hold of it, but it's still pretty horrific in places. So yeah, it's all right. It's a bit of fun. Back to poentilly next year, though. Back to the day job.
Yeah, it's all right. Like, whatever. And your panel is about new beginnings, isn't it? I think that's the title of it.
It is, yes. I'm on with Steve Kavanagh, whose latest, which is standalone, was released just last week, and it's shot into the charts, which is excellent news. Mark Billingham, who's The Last Dance, is the start of a new series for Mark, which I know he's very excited about. I chatted to him about it last year. And me, and Abir is hosting us on that. And he's obviously got a new book out next year, which I'll be badgering them soon to get an advanced copy of.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a good one. Vaseem, can you tell us about yours?
Yeah, so my latest is the fourth in my Malabar House series, which is set in 1950s India. It's called Death of a Lesser God. And in this one, we have an Englishman named James Whitby, who's born and raised in India, but who's now been convicted of murdering an Indian lawyer. And he's got 11 days before he's hanged. And my protagonists, Persis, who is India's first female police detective, and Archie Blackfinch, a forensic scientist who's from England, who's working in Bombay. They have to figure out whether he actually did this crime or not, because he claims that he didn't do it and he's the victim of a form of reverse racism. So I guess this is my look at whether or not post-colonial societies can look at their colonizers and treat them justly after they've won their independence.
Man, that's really interesting. Sounds great. And Liz, please could you tell us a little bit about yours?
My book is called Strange Sally Diamond, and the eponymous character, Sally Diamond, is about 42 years old when her adoptive father dies, and she disposes of his body in a rather unorthodox manner, shall we say. And this brings her to the attention of the media and her neighbours and her entire community. And she suddenly discovers that her past is very dark. She's very reclusive and very antisocial, but she suddenly discovers that she's actually the child of a paedophile and the child that he kidnapped. And that's her very dark background. So it leads to all kinds of reckoning for her, but she's also neurodivergent. So she's not as upset about this situation as everybody around her is, because she doesn't actually have any memory of it. No memory of it whatsoever. Her earliest memory is her 7th birthday party. So she doesn't know what has gone on before. And she, in some level, she kind of doesn't understand what the fuss is about. And another level, she realizes that it explains some of her behaviors, her, how she's quick to anger when she feels threatened and, can be violent. But it's not graphic. Like, I'm never go into the room where the bad things happen. But yeah, it deals with a lot of, I suppose, genetic inheritance of good and bad.
Yeah, and I mean, we put out a thing on the podcast Twitter, sort of at the halfway point, saying like, "What's your book of the year so far?" And yours had a lot of votes.
So wasn't it #1 in Ireland for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks?
It's still it's week 23 in the top 10 now this week.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm very happy with Irish readers. I'm just hoping that it might catch on in the UK.
I should say that I did predict this, because when Liz sent me a copy and I wrote back to her and I said, this book is brilliant. It reminds me of another massive hit called Eleanor Oliphant. It's Completely Fine, but with a crime twist. And I did predict this, so she does owe me 10%.
You do. That's right. I'm sorry. I must get my accountant.
Lost in the post.
Yeah.
Check it in the post.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Your panel is called Irish Crime Queen, so I mean, very fitting.
Yeah, there's I think at this stage there's probably 30 to 40 Irish female crime writers, which is astonishing for a country so small. And we're all sort of within the same age range as well. Catherine Ryan Howard would be the youngest. Julie Parsons would be one of the oldest. She wouldn't be too happy with me saying that, but I think Tana French kind of kicked it off for a lot of us, because she became a global superstar and kind of paved the way for the rest of us. But on that's a good panel. There's great Irish women on that panel. So we will be representing Emerald Noir and stamping on the patriarchy and the Catholic Church in particular. Can't wait.
However, Liz, if you're all roughly the same age, that means you're all going to die off at the same age. Sorry to take a dark turn, but it is a crime.
Well, then Catherine and her crew can take over. I'm sure there's others coming up as well.
And Laura, yours is about sort of mysterious mystery magic or misdirection. And I mean, the two of yours, I've not yet read your latest, but the other two, the sheer amount of research, do you have to do lots and lots of it to make it feel authentic to you?
I do, but I find it like, so people who often say to me, other writers will often say to me, I could never write a historical novel because I could never do all that research. But I don't really look at it as added work. I look at it as resources that help me to write the book and make it as kind of as vivid as possible. And I just feel like the things in history that I read about and then spark my imagination, and they give me plot ideas and subplot ideas and character ideas. Often the truth of that history is far, far more interesting and more exciting than anything I could ever make up. So in some ways, I see it as a shortcut to writing really interesting books, because I don't have to use my own powers of originality. I can use that to concentrate on what the characters are getting up to. So I do a lot of research, but I don't really consider it a huge part of it's nothing compared to like wrestling with my plot, which is the thing that drives me mad. And yeah, so there were all kinds of things that found their way into the book from my research. So like electricity shows where electricity was performed as magic tricks in the mid 18th century. And I was very interested in this book with the overlap between science and magic, and sort of people watching these electricity shows. And although there would be some people there who would be aware that this was like a natural science, there would be others in the audience who would think that they were viewing magic. And so that became a real theme of the book.
Yeah, man, it's really interesting. And Vaseem, yours are set in the 1950s. Is that right?
Yeah, 1950s India. It's a very intriguing period because it's just after independence and the Gandhi's assassination and the horrors of partition. And this is, of course, following 300 years of the British presence in India. And so for me, having born and grown up in the UK and then living in India for a decade in my 20s, because I've got that dual perspective, I can bring something new to how India managed this transition from being a subject power to being in charge of its own country, but still having to negotiate a new relationship with its former colonizers. Because England was a superpower, you couldn't just have a messy divorce and say we're never going to talk to you again, and we'll have the kids, or we'll chop them in half or whatever. I mean, for me, I think a lot of the stuff that goes, riffing off of Laura, the research is only really there to try and help you to grasp the kind of book that you're trying to write, because these are murder mysteries. So I write in a very golden age style. There's lots of cryptic clues and red herrings, but there needs to be the narrative needs to move along swiftly, because it is, after all, a crime novel. But what better way, I've always thought, to learn about the world and about history, while at the same time being entertained. And I love history textbooks, but you can't get that level of entertainment in the way that you can from, say, a book like this, Death of a Lesser God. The other thing I would say is that historical fiction itself is having a real moment, not just historical crime fiction, but historical fiction, historical retellings of ancient myths. They're in the bestseller charts all the time. So clearly, over the last decade, the publishing industry has realized that we have this vast reservoir of consumers who are book readers who want to know about things that have happened in the past, and for us to shine a light. We're busy talking about some of the topics that I'm talking about in a book like this, because we're debating the colonial era. We're re-examining these eras. We're tearing down statues, which I'm not a big fan of. I'd much rather have context put around statues and history, and that's what I try and do with these books.
I have to say, I learned most of my history through fictionalized accounts or biographies or whatever, like Abir's books. I would have known nothing about Indian pre-colonial, colonial India. I wouldn't have known very much about it at all if it wasn't for Abir's books. And God, I learned so much about the slave trade and from Blood and Sugar and Laura's books and the card games. So yeah, I think historical fiction is having a moment, and long may it last, but I think it needs its own chart in a way. It needs its own kind of it doesn't sit well with other genres of fiction. Do you know what I mean? I think it needs a separate chart of its own.
Well, as they say, from your lips to God's ears, or as they say in India, may your mouth be full of sugar.
Thank you, I think.
Unless you're diabetic, obviously.
And Mike, in terms of research for you, I mean, all of your books before Fearless were set in England. What sort of things did you come up against with an American head on?
Well, I thought I had a pretty good grasp of it because I almost exclusively read American crime fiction, some of the big authors and some of the obscure authors as well. So I thought I'd be okay with it. And it was fine. It got through the because I mean the story of this book, it was tagged on the end of a Poe contract a couple of years ago, and it went through UK editing and copy editing without any major hiccups. In fact, the scene where he sucks out a guy's eye stayed in. The American, but Pan Mac in the US, Flatiron, the Pan Mac imprint bought it, and they put it through their own editing process, obviously. And part of that was because they wanted it as the first book in a series where I had written it as a standalone initially, because it wasn't supposed to be read by anyone. So it went through their proper process, and some of the things I picked up were. There was some massive blunders. Like, for example, I knew Texas was big, so I just thought, well, instead of just Googling it, I thought it's about the size of Cumbria. Cumbria is big. Texas is supposed to be big, so it'll probably take about 2 hours to drive across Texas, which is obviously massively wrong. It's about the size of Germany and France combined. So I had journeys which I had like a 6-hour round trip to pick up some stuff and blah, 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 and it would have been like 3 days, and I had to completely rewrite some scenes. But other little things as well. I got picked up when he was having breakfast in a diner one day, and he had mushrooms with his breakfast. And it says, "Well, that's not what Americans do. That would be an obstacle for it. That would just like take you away from the story if somebody was eating mushrooms for breakfast." It did make me think: when do you eat mushrooms in America? Obviously, because they're clearly a breakfast food. So it was little things like that. I enjoyed it actually. It was some of the little things that I got picked up, and it was good fun. It was an enjoyable process. It's very different because you're not the expert over there. I mean, you're basically relying on someone else telling you the truth. So I mean, they could have been telling me anything. It might be the most famous breakfast food out there. I just went. I thought, oh, okay, I'll just take it out then.
Definitely.
I'll take out the scene where he sucks a guy's eye over there.
Will I ever see a sort of, like a Mike Craven director's cut version?
I can send you if you want. I mean, it's pretty rough. It really. I wrote it in 2014, like I said, and I hadn't been edited at that point. I had a publishing deal in 2014, so I started writing it before because I finished it in 2014. And I got my first publishing deal in 2014. So I'd been writing it without an editor, and I got to revisit it in 2022 with a sort of new head-on with a few more tools in the toolbox, and it was astonishingly bad. It was quite an interesting process to edit yourself 8 years down the line, which was interesting. Just while we're on about the Raj, because I know I've mentioned this before, but when you were sorry, Liz, you're saying you get a lot of your historical information and perspectives, I suppose, from historical books. I particularly Abir's and Vass's books. My grandfather was a colonel in the Raj, and my mother was born in India and had that sort of Raj lifestyle of a very senior army officer. So they had chauffeurs and parades and like multitudes of servants, and she just said it as if it was just something that happened. And the stories that my grandfather told me, it was just an interesting thing to do. Then I hear the other side of it. Well, I read about the other sides of it from the books that you guys are reading. Only, I mean, they're both dead now, which it would have been quite interesting to talk to them about that. Like, did you ever consider that's behind the crisp white uniforms that your servants are wearing? There's a lot of misery and oppression, all the stuff that you and Abir.
What you're saying is basically that your ancestor probably horsewhipped my ancestor at some point, Mike.
I've already said that to you, and I'm very sure that you were probably exposing yourself again, and absolutely deserved it.
But there is a danger, though, as well. With I mean, I remember meeting a Canadian woman who had studied Gone with the Wind in her history class, as if it was fact, and you can't, you like those happy slaves who are so delighted to serve the big white family. So, you have to be careful about, historical fiction. I think it depends on who writes it. You know what I mean? I don't think I could write about the years of the Raj. I don't think you could either, Mike.
Well, I would argue I would argue it's not just historical fiction. One of the things I talk about whenever I do talks is the fact that we often mythologize India even today. We turn it into Slumdog Millionaire and Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And there's plenty of that, swamis and snake charmers and happy slum kids. Well, there aren't any happy slum kids because your life is relentlessly abused and grim and all the rest of it. Probably like working for bloody Priti Patel or something. But so for me, I try and give a balanced view because there is wonderful things in India, both now and in the past. And not every Brit who went to India was Clive of India to try and loot the country. There were plenty who just went there because they were told there's a great job for you. You can make your fortune, young man. Many went there on missions to try and alleviate the suffering of the poor. Now you can argue the rights and wrongs of trying to go out there and on that sort of mission, but they didn't go out there to ravage the country. So I think. Yes, you're absolutely right. We have to be careful of some of the depictions, both in the past, but also in the present.
And sort of piggybacking off that, Liz, you mentioned your character was neurodivergent, and were there any sort of obstacles or fears you had about sort of creating that character or putting her on the page?
No, the only thing I was sort of adamant about was that she wouldn't have a diagnosis. She wouldn't have a specific diagnosis. She was just odd because when I was in school, there were people who were just a bit odd, and they were, or a bit weird. But, we got on with them. They were just part of the school. They were part of the makeup of the school, and they didn't have labels. Nowadays, all of those kids would have labels and they'd be somewhere on the ASD. And I just think I didn't want her to have one of those labels. Like, clearly she is neurodivergent, but her behaviors are because of her past and not because of some disorder that she was born with or acquired. It is something that she acquired, but because of how she was treated as a child and because of her very fraught relationship with her birth mother and the separation from her birth mother, which would have been extremely traumatic. So I did have a friend with autism read it because I just wanted to make sure I wasn't I didn't want to make fun of her. Like, there's a lot of humor in the book, but it's really her observations about things that we find normal that are funny. She points out the stupidities that we live with every day, and that was kind of fun to do. She's not because she's so straightforward. She doesn't see the difference between people of any age or color or gender or sexuality. Like, she treats everybody the exact same. She tells the local kids not to go to school because it's terrible, because that was her experience. She tells the local vicar that he tries to encourage her to come back to attending church, and she says, no, it's really boring. She tells the truth. She tells it like it is, and she has no qualms about telling the truth to people. And I really enjoyed the freedom of taking off all of my own filters and writing my own thoughts, expressing my own opinions through Sally Diamond. She and I both hate shopping centres with a vengeance.
Not the only ones.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, would it be okay to ask about how each of you sort of got into the writing game? I know there's 4 and stories can be quite long, so feel free to, abridge it however you want. But Laura, how did you get started being a writer?
Well, I've been working I used to work in politics, and I was getting kind of increasingly bored. And About 10 years probably before that. I'd never really thought about being a writer as a kid, but I'd always read voraciously. And I was getting, I started reading historical fiction after a long period where I'd only really read non-fiction. And I got really into historical fiction, and I'd read, I can't remember which book it was, but I do remember a moment of epiphany where I kind of thought to myself, maybe one day I could do that. And so that was always in the back of my mind. You know, every time I'd had a bad day in the office, I would think to myself, well, maybe I could write a novel, but I never really got round to it. And then eventually I just decided I'd had enough of politics. And so I went and did an MA in creative writing at City University. And that it was really good fun. I'm not sure I necessarily learned anything more doing the course than I would have done had I just been writing beyond, you know, off my own bat, because I don't really think there are any kind of magical shortcuts. I think you have to write, and you have to learn by being self-critical, and you have to learn through making mistakes. But I think what it did give me was a structure and a discipline that meant that over the course, you know, I had to produce a first draft of a novel. And so I did produce a first draft of a novel on this course, or I wouldn't graduate the MA. You know, you had to hand it in, and it was shit. But that was the first draft of Blood and Sugar. So I then got agented. I mean, it couldn't have been totally shit because I got agented off the back of that, but it needed work. And so I worked on it for a year. And then it went out to publication, and people had said to me, don't write historical crime. Nobody buys historical crime. People said to me, don't write about if you are going to write historical crime, don't write about the 18th century, because nobody is interested in the 18th century. And so I'd been told all this, but I ignored it. And then the book went to auction. So, what did they know?
Yeah, it's worked out all right. Oh, that's brilliant. And Mike, what about you?
I wanted to write ever since I can remember, to be honest. I got my mum to send away for a correspondence course when I was about 10. Most of my stories were about football or cricket, or depending on what time of the year it was and what sport I happened to be playing. And I carried it on. I joined the army when I was 16. I didn't write at all when I was in the army. Then I left 12 years later. But the sort of nudge I got was I was very ill in 2003, 2004. I was told I was going to die. In fact, I only just recently found out that my funeral was planned for a Monday. But that gave me a nudge, and in 2013 I entered the debut Dagger just on a whim. I took a week off work, wrote 3,000 words, sent it off. They got shortlisted, went down to the ceremony in 2013, met Lee Child and Frederick Forsyth and a few other very, very famous authors, and it just took off from there. I got a publishing deal based on that book, which I finished the following year.
Was that your first Poe Tilly one?
No, it was a book called Born in a Burial Gown. It was I give my detective the same illness I had, actually.
Right.
And it was published by a small publisher called Caffeine Nights, and who I'd met at a writing conference in Gretna. Now, the following year, David Headley was there, as he was living in a workshop, and I had a finished copy of Born in a Burial Gown. So I just said, yeah, have it. And he read it, which I thought was remarkably kind of him, because I assumed he would just leave it in somewhere on a service station on the M6 on his way back down to London. But and he emailed me and he said, next time you've got something to submit, please do send it to me first. So I did, and he signed me up, and it sort of took off from there. But he didn't want me to carry on with that series because he said it hadn't sold particularly well because it was with an independent publisher. So he asked me to write a new series, which was The Puppet Show, which was the first Poe Tilly book. So it's sort of and it wasn't a smash hit. It's been a sort of word of mouth series, but it's doing very well now. I mean, we can't complain. It's won a couple of awards.
He says modestly.
Isn't that the best? Isn't that the best way, when a career builds and builds and builds, and instead of, without having a go at anyone, but people who are coming into the industry now with enormous media platforms already, and the carpet welcome wagon and the red carpet is all laid out for them. Nothing wrong with that, I suppose, but it's just so nice to hear stories about people who've done it the hard way.
But it gives you a good bedrock as well, I think, because you've got a readership, because readers have actually found you and they've stayed with you and they are recommending you, rather than readers have found you because of a flashy media campaign, which sometimes, if the book isn't particularly good, is a massive double-edged sword. So it's quite reassuring when that happens, because it sort of there's a built-in longevity to your writing career almost, although you're still only one bad book away from crashing back down to earth with a big bang, aren't you?
And Vas, what about you?
Oh, well, I hope your listeners have got their hankies ready, because this is a sad, sad tale of woe. Look, I wrote my first book age 17. I finished it and I sent it off to some agents. I was reading Terry Pratchett's wonderful Discworld series, and I thought, yeah, this looks easy. I can do this. So I wrote a comic fantasy. I sent it off, told my parents I'm not going to university because I'm going to be a rich and famous writer. And these are Asian parents, bear in mind. I almost never made it out of that room alive. Anyway, it was obviously rubbish, and it was rejected, as it should have been. I spent the next 23 years working in all wonderful parts of the world, including 10 years in India. And every time I'd finish a book, in those days you couldn't email. So I printed out like 20 or 30 sets of sample chapters, and I'd mail them from India. And it cost me a bloody fortune to do that. And then, not every agent would reply, but I'd get replies coming back by email to me. And in the beginning, it was, go jump off a cliff, jump under a train, you're crap. Some agents are quite rude. But by the fifth book, I think people were saying, we really like your writing. And can you please send us the next thing you write? And then I was published at age 40 with my first series, which was called, the first book was The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra. And that was about a middle-aged policeman who retires, who's forced into retirement in Bombay, in India, and he has to solve murders. But he also has this unusual problem of inheriting a 1-year-old baby elephant. And the elephant doesn't talk, it doesn't sing, it doesn't fly. It's a symbol, it's a metaphor for this amazing country that I lived in for 10 years and saw change completely from the India that we think of in the past to this modern, very complex environment, which has wealth and globalization and westernization that's flown into the country and completely changed the map of urban India. But at the same time, we have legacy problems like slums and poverty and caste prejudice and religious intolerance. And that book, I never expected it to be published. I absolutely didn't. By this stage, I'd practically given up on my childhood dream of being a writer. And it was only because my wife, who was born and raised in Bombay, who I met out there, she said to me, well, you finished the damn thing now, you might as well just send it in. And I only sent it to 3 agents. I was used to sort of blanket bombing 30 agents in the past. Now I said, no one's going to read this, no one cares anymore. So I sent it in. 2 of them wanted to read it. One of them decided to represent me, and he's still my agent, Ewan Thornycroft at AM Heath 10 years later. And that book, it was a bestseller, and it translated into 17 languages, basically gave me a career.
Amazing. Those stories are so lovely to hear, aren't they? Not the awful stuff at the start, but the
I guess
redemption.
The lesson is, I mean, all of those 23 years, I was reading every single day. I was writing it on most days, and I was editing. And it's a really bruising and painful journey to be rejected time and time again. I can't tell you how everyone here has felt that rejection and that pain. But believe me, authors who managed to get to that promised land, they managed to find a way to pick themselves up. So that's the best piece of advice I can give to anyone. Work at your craft every single day, because the number one reason that books are rejected by agents is because they are not written to a publishable standard.
I often say that to people as well. Do not, like, people, they put the full stop at the end of the last sentence of their first draft and they send it to a publisher. I'm like, don't do that. Like, put it in a drawer, put it away for 3 months, then rewrite it again. Then give it to a trusted reader, friend, listen to their feedback, act on it, then rewrite it again. And then once you're really happy and you think there is nothing more you can do to improve this book, then consider sending it to an agent. But
I think that's completely true. And one of the most frustrating experiences of my life was this was before I was published. I knew a guy who was a fabulous writer, absolutely brilliant writer, and he would sit down and he would write a book, and it would be, and he'd write it really quickly, like kind of 3 months less to write, and he'd write this book. And he'd and you would read this stuff and it would have such enormous amounts of potential. And he was a really, really good, really great at characters, really great at dialogue. He had a lovely prose style, really exciting stuff. But you can't, I just really struggle to think that anyone can write a perfect book in that amount of time. And so he would just send this stuff out to agents. And when they came back with rejections, he would just sit down and write another book and do exactly the same thing over and over and over again, rather than realizing that what he needed to do was to sit down and edit it, to show that work to someone before he sends it out to agents, to get their feedback, to take that feedback into account, to rework it, to read other books and see what they're doing right that he wasn't getting wrong. And I don't think that he's certainly not published. I don't think he's even writing anymore. And that breaks my heart, because he had the potential to be such a great writer. But you have to be able to be self-critical. You have to be able to edit your work. And taking the time to learn that skill of self-criticism and editing is just as important as taking the time to be able to write the words and the characters and the plot and get it on the page. And I think that's would be my biggest bit of advice to anyone who is aspiring to be a writer, is be your own biggest critic, because the more you can address those criticisms within your own work before other people see it, the better they will think you will be, and the more chance that the higher chance you will have of getting that agent or getting that publisher.
Yeah, amazing advice. And Liz, please can you tell us a little bit about your journey to publication?
I was always in jobs that were kind of writing adjacent. I was a stage manager in theatre, so I worked on Shakespeare and Ibsen and Chekhov and Brian Friel, and actually nearly always male playwrights. I don't think I ever worked on a play written by a woman, which was a real issue in Ireland. It became a hot potato, a hot issue in about 2015, and there was a movement called Waking the Feminists, because the National Theatre announced their programme for the year, and our National Theatre, the Abbey Theatre, and for I think the 40th year in a row, there were no female playwrights on the main stage of our National Theatre. So it started a whole kind of movement towards getting female playwrights. But sorry, I'm tangenting.
You're fine.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so I was working as a stage manager, so I was always more interested in the text than the actual acting that was going on in front of my eyes. And I had some major star actors in front of me a lot of the time, but I was more interested in the text. And then I worked on a soap opera as sort of the administration side of the story team. So again, I was working really closely with the story team, but not because I was staff. I was contractually not allowed to write stories. And I had so many ideas. I was bursting with ideas for this soap opera for characters, and I wasn't allowed to even pitch them. So I think, if you have creativity in you, it has to work its way out some way. So I just kind of found, little competitions. There was a little kind of nostalgia radio series called Sunday Miscellany. So I wrote a story for that, and that got accepted. And then I entered a short story competition again for radio, and that short story got shortlisted. And in fact, that short story ended up being the opening chapter of my first novel, Unraveling Oliver, later. But everything I entered, every competition I entered a TV drama thing. It was to write a half-hour play set in a hotel room, and it was going to be broadcast live. It was the first time that drama was broadcast live in 47 years, but I won that competition. So and everything I tried, I won. And it would clearly the signs are all there telling me, write, you must write. So eventually I took that short story, that original short story, and developed a novel out of it. And then got an agent very quickly. Well, I sent it to 6 agents and 5 of them offered to represent me. But I picked the one who represented a friend of mine because I know that she trusted her. And then the rejections started flooding in because as good as these agents thought the book was, the editors didn't quite agree. In fact, it wasn't even the editors, it was the marketing people that didn't know where to put it, because it didn't, I mean, it was the early days of kind of domestic noir. Domestic noir wasn't a thing, but suddenly Girl on a Train came out, and followed by Gone Girl, and Unraveling Oliver followed that sort of domestic trajectory of it's something that's happening in the home, something sinister, and there's something sinister in the past, and something happened in France in 1974 and we're not quite sure what it is, and somebody ends up committing suicide. There's all kinds of strands of the story. So that was kind of my journey to it. And then that book won Crime Novel of the Year in 2014. And that was the first time I realized that I'd actually written a crime novel, because as far as I was concerned, I'd just written a book. I didn't really know anything about genre. I read what I liked. I didn't particularly read a lot of crime, to my shame. I'm still catching up. I still haven't read Agatha Christie. Don't tell anybody. But I'm still trying to catch up now with all of the crime writers of the golden age who I haven't read. So if everybody would stop writing for about 5 years and give me a chance to catch up, that'd be great. Thank you.
And I realize that we're sort of running on time here, but I just want to ask about sort of weird assignments around publication day, because Mike, you've written sort of a piece about snakes to tie in with the Fearless release. Yeah, and I say weird, but it was very interesting.
It was. I mean, I didn't suggest this either. It came from a e-zine in the States. They heard I used to breed snakes years ago, so they wanted me to write an article on breeding snakes, which I had to sort of, I mean, and I had to revisit genetics and all sorts of weird stuff like that. I miss a lot out because some of the stuff I did wasn't entirely legal. I mean, I don't mean I was breeding a snake with a pig or something like that. I mean, I had some poisonous snakes that technically you did need a license for, that kind of stuff. We're going to bleep this bit out, obviously.
We'll skirt over that.
I'm going to be terrified now when I see Mike taking his bag.
I had a lovely pair of water cobblers, but I had a party at my house once, and I swore blind that if I'd had a drink, I wouldn't touch the poisonous snakes, because obviously that's alcohol and venomous. Actually, venomous snakes, not poisonous snakes. Venomous is if something will inject poison into you. Poisonous is just like if something is poisonous and you eat it. So yeah, and I got drunk and I was saying, here's the water cobblers I've got, to people, and that was the end of that party. But yeah, so I wrote an article and I tried as best I could to sort of make it relevant to the book that I was sort of promoting at the same time. So I sort of did it. A lot was taken out. There was a huge section taken out about the snake wars in Newcastle. There was 2 rival snake breeders, and one ended up going to prison for 6 months. It involved a baseball bat, and it was all quite interesting.
I'd love to see a snake wielding a baseball bat.
I know a lot about snakes, and I mean the the third book in my Malabar House series, The Lost Man of Bombay, has a massive cobra on the cover, which has frightened a few readers, but there's a reason that it's there. What can I tell you about crazy stuff around publication? So Death of a Lesser God actually comes out on August the 10th, but yesterday I went up north I was invited by Anne Cleves, who's a wonderful writer, but also a good friend. And she invited me round to her house where she made scones with jam and cream, which was lovely. And that's because she was hosting me in her local church for a soft launch of Death of a Lesser God. We'd got some early copies up there. Packed out the church when we had an absolute blast. I hadn't expected to be sitting at the exact table in her kitchen where she writes the Vera series, the Shetland series, and all the rest of her amazing books. So that was lovely.
That is a cool publication story. Yeah.
I had to write a piece about ornamental hermitages, which in my book. So a big one of about a quarter of the Square of Sevens takes place on a big 18th century country estate, like a kind of Chatsworth or a Castle Howard. And so I was reading up on the landscape gardens of these places, and obviously, if you've been to a National Trust place, you'll know the all the temples and follies that they really like. So I kind of knew about those already, and grottos and things, but I didn't know about ornamental hermitages, which were you've got you're this really, really wealthy guy. You've got this beautiful ground. You think, what I'm missing is a hermit, and so you build yourself your hermitage, which would either be like a kind of fake cave complex or like a little flint house, like a little witch's house. And then you would need your hermit. So you would employ an actor who would grow his hair really long, grow his beard really long, and wear rags and live in your hermitage. And he wasn't allowed to talk to anyone. But if basically you'd be there, you'd have your guests over, and you'd take a perambulation around your lake, and then your hermit would kind of appear out of the trees and kind of go woo, and then run away again, and then so your guests would then follow him through the trees to the hermitage, and then they'd like kind of peer through the windows and see him sitting being all hermity in his hermitage. And so I got the example in my book was from a real one at this estate called Painshill in Surrey. And they employed their hermit for 7 years. He wasn't allowed to talk to anyone for 7 years. But if he successfully fulfilled his contract of doing all the woo and all that, he would get £700 at the end of it, which was, a really decent sum of money in those days. And so it was all going very well, and he was being all hermity and doing all his duties. But then they discovered that every single night he was going to the local pub in the village and getting drunk and chatting to people. So they sacked him. Anyway, I decided he had to go in my book. So there you go.
Story.
That was brilliant.
What a great story. I could do that. Mike does it every bloody day. He's always in the damn pub anyway, and he's always
I told that story at the Harrogate Crime Festival when I was on a panel with Will Dean, and he said he'd be my hermit.
Yeah, there you go.
Will Dean,
he's a fake hermit because he's always in London every time I turn around. Glamorous, glitzy festival.
He's got the beard in the cabin in the woods, though.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll finish with one last question then. What is your book of the year so far?
Oh,
I should have given you warning for this, really, shouldn't I?
Should have. Let me have a look at my bookshelf.
Are you saying specifically crime?
Nope, no. Whatever you fancy.
My book of the year is actually there's an element of crime in it. Is Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry, which has just been longlisted for the Booker Prize. I think it's astonishing. I had to read it twice to actually be sure of what I'd read because it's so incredible.
What is it called?
God's Time.
Yeah.
And I did an event with him at Hay, and he is just such an extraordinarily generous writer to other writers like me. I adore him and his work.
Ah, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Okay. I read a lot of literary fiction. I tried to be a literary writer for years and years, so I always read.
Yeah, we all did.
Oh, some people their dream was to just do one particular genre, but I always read at least 2 or 3 off the Booker shortlist every year. So you're saying Old God's Time is the one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Take your word for it. Take your word for it. Okay, well, my book of the year so far, it probably doesn't need any more publicity. It's a book called Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. It's not a crime novel, but it is an amazing book. It's full of warmth and humor, and it's about a female scientist in the, I think, 1960s or 1970s who's trying to make a way in a very male-dominated scientific world. But she decides to do things her own way and ends up on TV in charge of a cooking show where she uses her chemistry scientific background and becomes something more than the sum of her parts. It's just a fabulous book. It's won awards all around the world, sold millions of copies, and I believe that an A-list Hollywood star is scheduled to play the lead character in a series. The lady who played Miss Marvel, whose name is escaping me right now.
Brie Larson.
Brie Larson, that's it.
I have been reading. I go into when I'm working on a new book. When I start out, I tend to read lots of things that I think will help sort of set the tone, set the mood, that have kind of associations to what I'm writing. And so I've actually not read this year a great deal of new fiction. I've mostly been reading quite old stuff. And I have to say, the book that I read, which incredibly, I had never read the book, although I have obviously seen the film, is The Talented Mr. Ripley. And I just, it was such a treat to read the novel. Even though I love the films, the novel it's a real, just the psychology of it is just wonderful. And I absolutely adored it. And so I've really been quite enjoying reading not just that, but a whole host of other books that I've never got to before, but I have the excuse that it's somehow work. And so I've been really enjoying those.
Oh, that's great. And Mike, what about you?
Well, just before you say that, weirdly, you don't have to put this in, but weirdly, I read The Talented Mr. Ripley for the first time this year as well.
Oh, really? Well, there you go. We're all having that treat in store. If you haven't read The Talented Mr. Ripley, you should go and read it.
Oh, I read it, but I have to say, the film the film was so attractive in every way. I was just so bummed out when Anthony Minghella died, because I thought, he's the only person who could do justice to Unraveling Oliver if they ever made a film.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Sorry. Right. I thought Small Mercies by Dennis Lane was pretty astonishing. I was looking forward to it for so long, ever since I heard about it, and it was as good as I was expecting. Sean Cosby's new one, All the Sinners Bleed, again was an astonishing read. I'm going to say an author, because I read for the first time a Robert Crace book, and I started it on New Year's Eve, The Monkey's Raincoat. Now, he's been on my radar for a long time, mainly because we're beside each other on the bookshop shelves. And so I'd had The Monkey's Raincoat on my... Vaseem's going to show us something there now. It's The Monkey's Raincoat. Well, isn't that... It's almost as if we've been practicing, Vaseem. So I read it, and I finished it on New Year's Day, and then I just went through the full 19 books, one after the other. I haven't binge read a series like that ever, actually. I can't think of any. I mean, if I start to read Michael Connelly for the first time now, I'd probably binge his series as well, but I've been reading him for a few years now. So yeah, 19 books on the trot. So I'm going to say Robert Crace, and if I have to pick one, I'll say L.A. Requiem or The Last Detective. You can't pin me down.
Yeah,
excellent. Absolutely excellent.
Great series, and a very nice man. We had him on the show last year, I think, and he was just so lovely. I was
supposed to meet Matt Harrogate this year, but he cancelled because of COVID, didn't he?
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a shame.
Mine, for what it's worth, is I read a book called Bear Town. by Frederick Backman, who wrote A Man Called Ove. And it's about an ice hockey team in, I think it's Iceland. And there's sort of crime, and it's so good. I read it on holiday, and I couldn't put it down. So yeah, great book. Thank you so much for your time. We will see you in London.
Lovely to see you all.
Cheers. See you all in London.
Take care soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so the panels for our guests are Vaseem Khan is going to be moderating a panel on Friday the 1st of September from 10:05 until 10:55 a.m. It's called Sins of the Past, History's Enduring Inspiration. And he's going to be interviewing S.J. Paris, A.J. West, K.J. Maitland, and Anna Mazzola, who needs initials to fit in there, really. But that's going to be a great panel. All of their books are fantastic. So that'll be a really lovely discussion, ably chaired by Vass. The next one is still on Friday the 1st of September, 12:15 till 1:05. It's called Irish Crime Queens, and that's Liz Nugent, Catherine Ryan Howard, and Andrea Carter. And they're going to be in conversation with Jane Casey. So an amazing lineup. Although, at the same time in the other room, that's my slot. So all those guys on the Irish Crime Queens one, you've seen them before, haven't you? You know. I'm joking. I just want you to come see me. So my one is called Box Breakers, and it's about books and authors that defy genre. So I'm going to be chatting to Joe Callahan of In the Blink of an Eye fame, a phenomenal book, alongside Anita Frank and Will Carver. So a really, really cool lineup there. You've got a choice there, a really tough choice. So Irish Crime Queens or Box Breakers. If you go see Liz Nugent, I would. I won't blame you. Especially after talking to Liz. She's so lovely and fascinating, and she'll have such a lovely discussion. Laura Shepherd-Robinson is on the following day, Saturday the 2nd of September, from 12:10 until 1 o'clock. Her panel is called Mystery, Magic, or Misdirection, The Illusion of Fiction, and that's with Laura, Jeremy Dyson, and Andy Nyman. Moderated by Essie Fox, whose book cover is phenomenal. The Fascination, absolutely beautiful. So that promises to be a really good one. There'll be a lot of fun there. And Laura tells a story about a hermit in this episode that is so funny. You might have already heard it, depending on how I edit this. But you can, there'll be more stories like that. So do go check it out. And finally, on Saturday the 2nd at 20 to 5 until 5:30, Mike Craven's going to be joining Steve Kavanagh and Mark Billingham, and that's going to be chaired by Abir Mukherjee, and it's going to be called New Beginnings, where they talk about their new books. So Mark Billingham's recently started a new series called The Last Dance, the first book, and it's brilliant. Mike Craven has brought out Fearless, which is a departure from Poe and Tilly. And Steve Kavanagh's new one, again, doesn't feature Eddie Flynn, so a bit of a departure there. So they'll be talking about sort of taking the leap into a different genre, and I think it'll be great. And again, those are 4 out of many, many panels that you've got a choice of going to see. So do go, and that'll be fantastic. Thanks for listening, and we will hopefully see you in London in a few weeks' time. Bye-bye.